Notice you'll find good old Manitowoc County Detective Remacher still involved in the case. Interesting items were recovered, including what looked like blood-stained rock, possible bones, human bone fragments, a bunch of other expletive. None of the items found above were ever disclosed to the media. No press conference was held to expand on the working theory that Ken Kratz and law enforcement held. Again, in an above-board case, are these the actions that would be taking place? So they arrest Brendan Dassey, and they still don't process any of these human remains and bones, or potentially human remains and bones, found all over the quarry matching the dog scents. Nobody's interested. It's really weird. It's really weird, is it not? April 25th, Leslie Eisenberg examines a bunch of biological material recovered in the last few months and makes bench notes on each tag number that she examines. Most of these items were from the 5-gallon buckets recovered from the quarry. Leslie also makes note of human bones with cut marks in this examination on this day. None of this new information ever made it into the media or the public. The theory was not expanded, nor was the criminal complaint to contain any of these details. The perception was still, at this time, that Teresa was last on Avery's land and never left. June 15th, Eisenberg re-examined some tag numbers from this case that she had marked for reevaluation. One particular tag number of interest is 7964, which is from burn barrel number 2, or the deer camp. To this day, no clear verification has ever been given. Anyway, upon further examination, Leslie updates her determination of the bone in the baggie to being human. July 4th, Eisenberg releases her entire report documenting her findings to date. Her findings include multiple human bones that were found outside of the Avery salvage yard and a detailed age and sex determination of the bones she examined. Lastly, Leslie identifies 7964 and gives a possible detail on time since Teresa's death because of some clues on the human bone. And this is her note here. The presence of empty pupil casings, tag number 7964, collected November 12, 2005 from barrel number 2 and identified as burnt bone pieces, suggests that perhaps there was an undocumented interval between Miss Hallback's death and the burning episode when her remains may have been exposed to egg-laying flies. However, it is not possible to determine from this analysis if those pupil casings were associated with the human or non-human fragments identified by the undersigned as collected under that tag number. It is worthy of note, however, that the same evidence tag number yielded the suspected human bone fragment with evidence for multiple cuts. And if you haven't checked out the MINDSHOCK episode on pupil casings, check that out. We go over that pretty extensively as well. Remember, this bone was recovered from either burn barrel number 2 or the deer camp. None of this information was ever disclosed to the media or the public. No press conference was held to expand on the details of the theory that was against Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. The crime was still said to have happened on the Avery property. December 3rd, 2006. Eisenberg submits her second and final report on the Avery case. This report encompasses work that took place from July through December 2006, a time where Buting and Strang were squarely focused on Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office as the culprits of planting and possible Denny suspects like Bobby and Scott. Leslie mentions tag number 7964 again and mentions that it has cut marks. This bone does not come from Avery's pit, but rather burn barrel number 2, and actually produced other body parts besides just bones. Lastly, Leslie identifies many tag numbers that are human bone. Not suspected human, but directly human. These tag numbers are the items she examined that came from the quarry area. None of this information is ever released to the media or the public. The perception is that Teresa never left the Avery salvage yard alive. Fast forward to 2007. During trial and closing arguments, Ken Kratz gave the jury, the media, and the public his thoughts about what he felt about Eisenberg's human determination just 3 months prior. Attorney Kratz, so the bones in the quarry are really not evidence in this case. And so Mr. Strang has made a big deal out of showing you maps and a little flag and things like that about possible bones. Again, speculation, conjecture is not part of this case. Facts are going to be what decides this case. And that's almost comical in nature because they've provided no facts that Avery or Dassey committed any crime here. If you notice what Kratz does, he says the quarry burns are not evidence in this case. He says this, of course, because Eisenberg only testifies in reference to the quarry about tag 8675, the suspected human pelvic bone. Neither the state or defense ask her specifically about the bones she deemed as human in her December 2006 report. The public perception is that all of the bones were found on the Avery property and that Stephen Avery murdered Teresa on Halloween 2005 with the aid of Brendan Dassey. No mention was made of the strong dog interest nearly 2 miles south-southwest and the many buckets of piles that recovered human bone. Now, I don't know why the guilters are so desperate to ignore all of this if they claim they really are after the truth. So did someone else get murdered in the quarry? Because they're saying they're human bones. They were identified as human bones. And if we're saying that identification cannot be definitive, well, what about the bones that are supposedly Teresa's? So it's really weird where it's convenient to hallucinate that this is all 100% when it points to Avery. But to claim that there's anything that doesn't lead to Avery, that's all conjecture. The psychological projection of Ken Kratz knows no bounds. Fast forward to 2011, September 20th, the infamous day that the many human bones were returned to the family. Many of these bones were found on January 12th, 2006. During evidence processing. To give you a visual of just some of the tags and bags that were returned, see here. You'll note that item 7964, the bag that was identified as human in the summer of 2006 by Eisenberg, was part of this group. None of this was ever reported to the media or the public. Heck, this action violated Stephen Avery's rights, if by nothing else, not notifying him or his lawyer of biological evidence being returned. So wait a second. They're returning bones found in the quarry to Teresa Hallback's family? If they're not pertinent to this case, then why would they be returned? If they're not Teresa Hallback, why are they being returned to her family? I mean, these are questions that need to be answered, and nobody's answering them. I mean, I don't know what to make of this. The MINDSHOCK listeners, feel free to give your thoughts on this. This is all quite mind-shocking. The conclusion here from the onset of their defense of Avery, Buting and Strang had the right track but the wrong targets. The targets were Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office and their civil lawsuit. Ken Kratz was more than happy to have that be the case in chief of his opponents because he knew all too well that the energy would be spent there and not in the quarry, where neither the media or the public knew anything about the many pieces and cents of Teresa Hallback. The tunnel vision wasn't necessarily only with Manitowoc County and CASO, it was with Pagel and Kratz from the early days of November 2005. So yeah, it's all very, very curious. It's all very, very curious. There's no mention, again, also of this FBI investigation taking place prior to Teresa Hallback, possibly having to do with Teresa Hallback being a CI, possibly not. Again, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, make sure you check out the previous episode. But when you're looking at the totality of the timeline and how Kratz was trying to fool everybody, it all makes a lot better sense when you're looking at it in hindsight. And again, Kratz, Manitowoc, they never knew that there would be this level of scrutiny levied upon their corruption and frame-up of Stephen Avery. And this is without even getting into all of the coincidences with Christine Rudy, with Carmen Boutwell. I mean, there's just a never-ending stream of coincidences and anomalies that the guilters just stick their head into the sand, nothing to see here, all on the up and up. You don't see this in other cases. In legitimate up and up investigations and cases and rightful convictions, you don't see any of this. So it's just really, really bizarre how the guilters desperately cling to the words of Ken Kratz, which are conflicting in and of itself, but there's really no substance to anything said here, and it's very obvious on how this is framed in hindsight. At the time, it was a little more difficult, and all these muddying of the waters regarding chain of custody and all these things, was that all by design as well, or was it a combination of incompetence and corruption? Because obviously there's no evidence that every single member of Manitowoc was in on this frame-up. It could have only been a couple people. Everybody else is just following orders. So a few comments here regarding this timeline. No mention of blood until the morning of the 6th when the crime lab accessed the RAV4, finding it unlocked. And that those, again, if you haven't checked out the RAV4 episodes in the MINDSHOCK podcast, there's 3 episodes. We go into detail the timeline, getting the RAV4 to the crime lab, all of the bizarre issues, again, that you don't see in any other case. The only blood mentioned prior was blood in Stephen Avery's trailer on a door frame collected on the 5th by Coburn. The following day, the 6th, they collected more blood from the bathroom laundry area. It's documented in the case reports and also in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office reports. So what is Ken Kratz yammering about? How the expletive did he know about the blood in the RAV4 on Saturday the 5th? A response here, yeah, that is the one thing that sticks out in my mind. He is so sure of the blood being found on Saturday, or he realized later on that he expletived up by stating that and had to fix it by the doors were locked and the RAV4 was never opened at Avery Salvage Yard. This case is such expletive of manipulation and corruption. So a couple more comments here. Good timeline analysis, but in focusing on Kratz, for sure a truly despicable man. You're letting Strang and Buting off the hook. They were sent by Wisconsin Attorney General Lautenschlager to ambush the case. Only days, so this is from page 161, Beyond Avery Road, Buting and the Beast by Chad Spencer Kelly. Only days before Fallon comes aboard, less than half a block from Fallon's office, Dean Strang is meeting with Stephen M. Glynn in Strang's office. Strang is a colleague of Fallon, and their offices are located half a block away in Madison, Wisconsin. Civil suit attorney Stephen M. Glynn has recommended that Stephen Avery settle and hire Strang and Buting immediately. Strang and Buting were horribly negligent, and Avery even sued them for ineffective counsel in 2012. There was no DNA expert, coerced minor confession though Buting was an expert in that area, and on and on. I mean, those are all excellent points. I mean, to have this obvious of a frame-up and corruption and violation of Avery's rights, I mean, this is ineffective counsel. I don't know how anybody can argue that it wasn't. I mean, even with everything stacked against them by corrupt judges and the corrupt state, it still doesn't explain why they didn't even attempt to pursue these things unless they were compromised or they were in on it. Or they are just really well-meaning incompetents. But it doesn't seem that they're that incompetent from their interviews. Then again, they did have a pretty good media tour as fallout from the case, so who knows what kind of compromising took place, if any. This is, of course, MINDSHOCK, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Over 120 closed-door, off-the-record meetings between the state and defense took place with the judge in Avery's trial. And it would be very, very curious if there was a recording device in on those meetings. Because again, if we're talking about truth and justice, blind justice and transparency, shouldn't the public be entitled to know what was discussed during those closed-door meetings? Why were they off the record? Isn't this a matter of public record? This is a public trial. Bottom line is Avery won his lawsuit, and Wisconsin was potentially on the hook for $1 billion in false convictions from the Innocence Project. From page 30, Beyond Avery Road, Buting and the Beast by Chad Spencer Kelly. But the truth of the matter is there were 900 Stephen Averys writing to have their cases reviewed. but the state made sure none of those potentially innocent were being fast-tracked to freedom because of the possibility of a great financial loss due to multiple civil lawsuits dipping into the state budget. If all 900 inmates writing to the Wisconsin Innocent Project were innocent, became insulted by a $25,000 cap-off and petitioned on average for a $1.1 million in compensation, as Stephen Avery will, then the state budget would be hit hard in the pocket for claims of up to $1 billion. Simply, a new forensics DNA testing was a threat. Thus, Attorney General Lautenschlager assured that the backlogging of the state crime lab was a must. Okay. Now, here is potentially the biggest mind shock as of yet, and it's not even directly related to Stephen Avery. Now, even the most ardent coincidence theorist, the most authority-worshipping cultist, has to admit, I mean, I would think, I don't know how many Dunning-Kruger goofs think that there's not a single innocent person in prison, but there's 900 potential wrongful convictions. Now, some of those could really be guilty people, obviously. I mean, even if we say 50% is guilty. I mean, it's still astronomical. They could, if the state, so people go on and on about Avery's $36 million lawsuit against Manitowoc, that's pennies compared to upwards of $1 billion in liability and compensation to all these other wrongful convictions. Because we know how they do business in Wisconsin. I mean, it's fairly obvious from the Stephen Avery case. But even if only half of these individuals are innocent, now all of a sudden the state crime lab is backlogged with DNA testing. I mean, again, you have to look at it just from a purely budgetary point of view. There's a lot to lose here for the state. This isn't just about $36 million. If we put, for the people that say, oh, there was no way they would get Strang and Buting in on it, when you're talking about upwards of $1 billion, paying off a couple people for a couple $100,000 or even $1 million or even some threats, that's nothing. I mean, are guilters really that clueless about how corruption works and basic human psychology? As if state or government officials have never taken payoffs in the history of the United States. I mean, come on. I'm not saying that happened here. I'm saying to deny that that's a possibility, how silly is that? To deny that humans are capable of being corrupt and taking payoffs, being in on schemes, or dare I say conspiracy, more than one individual, acting in a nefarious fashion. There's upwards of $1 billion on the hook here. This is well beyond Avery and his $36 million lawsuit. So when you keep that in mind, does it make more sense that Strang and Buting could have been compromised? And that's without even going on to the direct connections with individuals like Lautenschlager. Here's another comment here. Excellent post. The only part I'd strongly disagree with would be the part of Buting and Strang having the right track but the wrong target. I mean, if that were true, what was their track and who was their target? To me, it's obvious they had no clear track and certainly no definitive targets. There were so many opportunities for them to impeach witnesses, discredit experts, and clarify perceptions, which they simply let go by the wayside. It's unimaginable. They were soft on everyone they could have easily hammered, like firing an arrow into the bullseye of a target. Instead, what they did was more like lobbing water balloons over the target so no one got wet. I don't know when people are going to be able to put aside the impression of those two men from making a murderer. Hell, I really wanted to like them too, and accept what it really was, and that is, Buting and Strang were complicit with the state and never approached putting on a vigorous defense of Stephen Avery's rights. There is not one aspect of their defense where anybody can say they fought and they fought hard. Sad but true. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these two men are evil, but I feel it's more likely they caved into peer pressure and just didn't really challenge the state. And that's an interesting post here on Reddit regarding Strang and Buting. Again, we don't know what the real truth is. Did they start off not compromised and then became compromised? I don't know. But there's such a lack of comparison to how cases and investigations are handled where there is no conflict of interest, or where there is a conflict of interest and it's yielded. Because again, all of the planted evidence is being found by Manitowoc County officials. I mean, is that not suspect? I mean, it's just the whole case should have been thrown out from the get. I mean, it's just so mind-shocking. I mean, there are known serial killers with definitive evidence that get their cases thrown out because of things, just, you know, because of paperwork issues or whatever, procedures not followed. And here you have just this landslide of corruption, and the case isn't thrown out, and no evidence of guilt. Where in other cases, you have the murderers, everybody knows they did it. There's physical evidence, there's witnesses, there's just so much evidence, but they didn't follow protocol, they didn't follow the letter of the law, and their murderers are out in the street. And yet here you have innocent people where nothing was followed, and they're in prison. Or potentially innocent. I know there's a lot of guilters, they think they just vehemently maintain on blind faith and blind faith alone, in the words of the corrupt like Ken Kratz, that Avery's guilty. It's really bizarre. So here's another post here commenting on this. I think the biggest problem faced by Buting and Strang was the sheer volume of information and the amount of time they had to examine everything. Would need to hire a whole team to scour discovery and find everything wrong. The biggest mistake the defense did was to play by the rules while the other side cheated. How can anyone win if the other side cheats? Hides discovery, mislabeled discovery, lied to by the state. They were good attorneys with a dumpster fire. They aren't cutthroat, and they needed to be in Ken Kratz's courtroom. Lloyd, the public defender, dropped the ball. He could have worked on discovery, but it piled up and then was given over to Buting and Strang in one large lot. They had 8 to 9 months to work on this. They also trusted that investigators did their job. And is that just making excuses for Strang and Buting?